So thank you for coming despite of the great weather. And I could see you were a bit pushed by the organizers, and I very well understand it. Okay, so I will continue on last course, but hopefully you don't need to remember anything from last course to understand this class. And so I was talking about concentration of measure, self-averaging, and this is really a great tool for mathematicians, because when you know it, you can somehow act like a physicist with the right arguments to do it. So the theorem I proved last time was a very general theorem, which was, so if you take a random matrix, so that if you look at, let's say, these vectors are independent, so only this hypothesis, then what we saw is that if you look at the deviation of, so the empirical measure, I divide it, well, I can divide by square root. I don't need to do that. Minus the expectation. Greater than delta times the total variation. So this was bounded by exponential minus delta square n over 2. Okay, so this is what I proved. And so this is a very general result with respect to the entries, but we have a lot of other tools from concentration of measure, which allows us to retrieve this kind of result with even a better speed, provided you have more hypotheses on the entries. Okay, and so one of the nice hypotheses you can do is assume that the entries satisfy what is called the log Sobolev inequality. Okay, so what does this mean? This means that so mu satisfies log Sobolev inequality. So this means that for all f, so if you look at the integral of L2 log of x squared divided by mu of f squared, mu, so this is bounded by a finite constant. So if I am in dimension 1 times f prime square. Okay, so this is stronger than Poincaré inequality. This is verified by mu, which is a Gaussian. This is verified by more general thing, provided the second derivative is strictly bounded below by a positive constant. Actually, I put identity, it's deformation. Okay, and this is also verified if mu is a law of some function of a Gaussian. Okay, if it's verified, in general, if it's verified for mu, it's going to be verified by the push forward, provided phi is Lipschitz. Okay. So what is the general result? So if you have entries which satisfy this, you have very general concentration of measure results. So take x1, xn with low mu I, and this all satisfy log Sobolev inequality with constant c, and they are independent. And so then the result that you have on concentration is, so it's due to Hertz's argument. And what this will say that if you take G from Rn into R, so which is Lipschitz, the Lipschitz constant is just the sup over, so here is the Euclidean norm, so it's the sum of the square root. So G of x1, xn, and you have G of y1, ym. also divided by the Euclidean norm. So this is the Lipschitz constant for the Euclidean norm. Then what you can see that if you look at the probability that your function applied to this independent random variable minus its expectation is greater than delta times the Lipschitz constant, so then this will be smaller than, so I think it's 2 exponential minus delta square 2c, something like this. Maybe I'm a bit wrong with the 1 over 2. So there is a constant for 1c. Okay? So this is the entropy that you bounded by the Fisher information. Does this help? Yes? Oh yes, yes, Kullback divergence. Yeah, yeah. So that's so it's a very nice. Yes, what I didn't say is that so you have a very nice properties of Log-Sobolev inequalities. In particular, it tensorize. So if you have two measures which satisfy the Log-Sobolev inequality with the same constant, or you can always bound this by the maximum, then the tensor product will also satisfy Log-Sobolev inequality with the same constant. And it's the same with the Poincaré inequality. So it's why in statistical mechanics, Log-Sobolev inequalities and Poincaré inequalities are used quite a lot, because you are often tensorizing because you have many particles, and so you want to have a uniform such control.
Can you give an example of a distribution that wouldn't satisfy this?
Well, if V is not convex.
Okay.
So if you have a double well, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's actually even I think. So I'm not sure if at some point there was some question. So let's say that you have something which is strictly convex somewhere and just convex everywhere. I'm not sure that then you can get. I think you cannot get Log-Sobolev inequalities. I think you have counter examples.
So is there like formal condition on the distribution that satisfies? Sorry.
So this is a condition for all test function f.
Okay.
You should have this bound. Yeah. And the point is that it's not too difficult to prove for the Gaussian. And then for this kind of flows, so it's really when it's strictly convex. So somehow you have a sub-Gaussian tail, and it's even a bit stronger than sub-Gaussian tails.
So there are no examples where V is not convex, where we can have Log-Sobolev inequality.
No example, I don't know. Maybe you can cook up something.
But
Yeah.
Log-Sobolev implies fast mixing. Imagine
Yeah.
you have a V, it means big Lambda dynamics and then fast mixing. So
Yeah.
as soon as you have things that doesn't mix fast, it cannot
Yeah.
be Log-Sobolev.
Yeah. It also implies because of these sub-Gaussian tails. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, actually, you can remark that. So if you take just g equal to x, it's going to be Lipschitz. And so you get sub-Gaussian tail. So you need to have sub-Gaussian tails. Yeah, you need to be sub-Gaussian. I want to say that there are very nice results by Talagrand. So for compactly supported, mu I, okay, on a compact support K, so all on the compact support K, and then he has the same kind of results, but you need to take the median. And then you have the same kind of bond. So there is some C which depends only on K, and you have delta square. Okay, but so it's nice. So all what I will say, if you work a bit more, because if you know that you concentrate near the median will not be far from the mean, and so on. So it's kind of equivalent statement. Okay, so why is it great? Because you can apply this kind of result to many functions. So if you apply in random matrices, so the first function you may want to take is that the entries, function of the entries, which is just the trace of f of x divided by square root of n. Let's say that the x is a Wigner matrix. And then it's not difficult to see that, so GL is going to be bounded by 1 over n. So let's say that this is C1, but actually I think it should be only F Lipschitz. Yes? Yes. It's not the same C. It's some seq which depends only on the compact set here. Yeah. So actually, if you want to, I'm going to do some advertisement, but in the book with Anderson and Zaitouni on random matrices, we detail quite a lot the proofs of this kind of inequalities. Less Talagrand, but all these are very detailed, and also how it applies to compact groups, like when you look at the unitary matrices. So I mean, yeah, so if you look at Anderson, I mean, we even redo the proof of all these inequalities, so, but it would take still another class to do that. Okay, so the point I'm saying now, if I take the same thing at there, what I can check is that the Lipschitz constant is bounded by, so actually at least by the 1 over n times FL. How do you see that? So you look at g of x minus g of y, and so this is going to be the trace of f x divided by square root of n minus f y divided by square root of n. Okay, and then you can check that this is going to be the same. So it looks wrong because you have non-commutative matrices, but actually it's right. You can do as if you had commutative stuff because you have the trace, and here you have x minus y. Okay, and from there you can bound uniformly this operator, and here you will have the trace of x minus y, so you just apply Cauchy-Schwarz, and I forgot the square root here. Okay, and so when you do that, what you find is that this is going to be smaller than 1 over n, the trace of x minus y squared. So the n times f prime infinite. Okay, so if f is if C1 you get the proof, and otherwise you can approximate the Lipschitz function by C1 function. Okay, so you have this, but you have also, and you could look at the largest eigenvalue. So you see that as some function of the entries. And it's not difficult to see that it's going to be Lipschitz with constant, which is 1 over square root of n. So this is an exercise. And so now if I apply my two results, for instance here, so here what I will get is f Lipschitz, or let's say f prime infinity, and here I get, so if I have LSE, or they are all independent, plus log Sobolev inequality, then I get the delta n square. Okay, just because, so my constant is 1 over n f Lipschitz, and so I just plug it here. So this multiplies delta, and so I just get the n square. Okay, so under the stronger assumption, you have better bounds of this type. And for, if you look at the lambda max minus the expectation, well, you can check that. So this will be bounded by exponential minus delta square times n. and you have a constant. Okay, so you have so that's very nice because you can look actually all the eigenvalues. If you put them in increasing order, they will concentrate around their mean. Another thing I would like to argue is that you have another type of concentration that is nice to use in random matrix theory. So it so here it was I just stated for yeah. Yeah. So here also I have some constants. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, actually it's much more general. I mean, I could have a variance profile, I could have Wishart, I could have the matrices we considered yesterday. It's just, you just need to check that somehow your functions are going to be Lipschitz and to find the constant. Yeah.
What happens if you only take the row independent as yesterday, but you also assume the turbulence inequality for the laws of the rows? You still get the F square?
So yes, so if you would assume that, so you mean you would assume log Sobolev on each rows? Yeah, I think then it would be still nice. Yeah, it would still work. Yeah. Yeah.
No, but with n and not n square, right?
Well, it depends. I think with n square, yeah.
Because the N square comes from the 1 over n normalization of the N square.
Yeah. So somehow everything which is usually stated for independent entries at the level of concentration, you could add, for instance, an interaction which is convex and stuff like this, and you would still have concentration, but then all the things to get the convergence of the expectation might be different. Okay, so the other thing where you have concentration is if you look at the scalar product with a random vector. So A is deterministic. Yeah.
So if my stuff is not a sparse random matrix,
Yeah.
then the knowledge of eigenvalue does not concentrate. But what is failing in this condition? The log Sobolev inequality?
So here the log Sobolev sparse you need to multiply by a Bernoulli. And so it will not satisfy log Sobolev.
Okay, I don't have intuition on that. I mean, I can see, but I just don't see it like in the
But still, I mean, you said it's not concentrating because it's going to go away.
Yes.
But it's still maybe going away towards a given point, no?
Does it? I don't know.
It depends on the sparsity.
Yeah, it depends on the
If
sparsity.
you take the Schlemi, there are regimes where it does concentrate,
Yeah.
even when it's sparse.
You know, it's like constant and it's
No.
no, okay. Of course, this is different thing. Okay, so for constant, if you use the log Sobolev as same, so that this
Yeah.
issue is just not okay.
You know, also if you close the average makes it as well.
So you have to see.
Well, the average maybe doesn't go away because most of the matrix.
Yeah, I mean, usually the concentration of measure, this kind of concentration of measure is true, but then the question is the convergence of this guy. Can or not? Okay, so let me continue. So another concentration of measure result which is nice is what is called Hanson-Wright inequalities. So it's true if the xi are independent and sub-Gaussian. Okay, so this means that this is finite for some lambda positive. And so what Hanson-Wright inequalities tell you is that so this minus its expectation is also going to be bounded something like this. So this depends on maybe it's 1 over k. Yeah. I should have put some constant of k. Okay. K of lambda. Okay, so some constant. Okay, so here this is a trace of A star, and this is the largest eigenvalue, the operator norm of A. Okay, and this kind of thing actually, so if A is diagonal, you can very well understand it is a sum of II independent variable with some weight. So it's very easy to prove by Chebyshev inequality or whatsoever. It's more sophisticated when you have A which is not diagonal, but you can still prove it, and actually by using this kind of result and looking at the properties of Lipschitzness. So it's not really Lipschitz because it's quadratic, but for instance, if you take the square root, it's going to be Lipschitz, and things like this, if A is bounded, then you can retrieve this kind of information.
You don't need subgaussian.
So here you will need subgaussian Mendelssohn right. But you could also prove this kind, so it would not exactly be the speed, but something similar by using Talagrand. And actually, so in the result I cited by Couillet, Loire, and Liao, they use this kind of concentration of measure with X, which is this vector sigma of Wi, Wxj, okay, where W is some random vector. And they use the fact that somehow this is sufficiently Lipschitz in the W, because sigma is Lipschitz. Okay, so I want to emphasize that as soon as you have enough randomness in these vectors, you can apply this concentration inequalities. Okay, so let me now go to the. I wanted to give you the ideas of the proof of the convergence. So I'm going to give you just the main ingredient for the proof of the convergence of Wishart matrices. So I had Wn, which was 1 over P, and I had some S. I think this was my S. And what I wanted to prove whether the empirical measure of this measure was converging towards some, so I think I denoted STS and alpha. And what we prove, in fact, is so to think that so the Stiegler's transform, so which was this guy. So Gn of z minus so some gs of z is going to 0 as n goes to infinity, so almost surely. So gs of z, so if I don't want to assume convergence of this guy, I mean, well, maybe I can assume that this is converging, but so gs of z is a solution of this kind of system. With the right condition on gs. And what I said, actually, I wonder if I stated correctly. So what I said is that actually in Couillet and Loire, they prove a bit more that this convergence, they prove the convergence of the expectation of the resolvent towards some deterministic. So this is going to 0. Okay, so part of the result is that you have a unique solution to this kind of equation. So in fact, this is not very difficult to see because so here you have analytic functions. Okay, and plus they are uniformly bounded if you take the imaginary part of z bigger than some epsilon. Okay, so you know that any limit will be analytic. That's Montel's theorem. So it's enough actually to show convergence far away from the real axis. And far away from the real axis, it's very easy to see that this is a fixed point of a function, okay, this function, which is contractive. Okay, because the imaginary part of z is going to make this very small. So that's not very difficult. So again, in the notes, all this is precise. And so somehow the main thing is to show this equivalence, and the fact that you have this. And the fact that you have this equation for the Stiglitz transform. So the way to prove it is, as I said, to show that you have some equation for the resolvent, or for the expectation of the resolvent. Again, here I state the thing almost surely, but because of concentration, I know I only need to prove convergence of the expectation. Okay, so how do? I do a bit like. So I look at the matrix, I take the expectation, and I multiply by Wn. As maybe before I go, you can check that the proof is exactly the same for Couillet and Luar and so on set up in deep learning. Okay, so then I want to compute this. And so I expand. So Wn was this kind of matrix, so I write it 1 over p, the sum of vi vit. Okay, where vit, where vi is is. Okay, so they are independent. And so this is the sum 1 over p, so I can put the sum actually outside. And so here, so it's always kind of a mixture, these arguments are a mixture of probability and linear algebra. So here it's not very sophisticated. So the linear algebra is to state that if you look at the resolvent, so I should put it like this, apply to Vt. So this is going to be a minus 1 applied to Vt divided by 1 plus t v a minus 1 v. Okay, so that's an exercise. You multiply left-hand side by right-hand side and so on, and this is easy. So you apply this here with v, which is vit, on vn, so on a, which is going to be 1 over p, the sum from g different from I. Which I denote AI. Okay, so when you do that, you have 1 over p, the sum of the expectation of, so it's z minus, so maybe I should call it wi to look better. And here I have vit vi, and what is t? It's minus 1 over p divided by 1 minus 1 over p vi z minus wi minus 1 vi. Okay, so that's easy. And now I'm going to use everything I did. So I'm going to tell you, well, this concentrates because vi is independent of wi. It's a random vector. I have assumed everything so that I can use concentration of measure. So I can replace this by z. So maybe I could actually write it like this. So this is approximately 1 over p, the expectation over vi. And when I look at the expectation over vi in this case, what I get is a trace of y s transpose times v minus wi minus 1. Okay, because I just take the expectation over vi, and vi is this guy, and the yi are independent, and I add it. And now, again, because of concentration of measure, I see this should be approximately the expectation. You see, I feel really like a physicist. And it's very rare. So. And then, well, then by the same type of argument that we had before, it's only a rank 1 perturbation of the real thing, and I took the trace. So this should be approximately the same thing when I replace by z minus w minus 1. Okay, there are more details in the lecture, in the notes, but because time is going. So once you are there, you are in a very good shape. Okay, because what you have proven is that so the expectation of your resolvent, it's W. So this is going to be approximately, and you can prove it's really an operator norm, like the expectation of z minus wi minus 1 vi transpose. And here you can divide by 1 plus something which is the trace of st z minus w minus 1. And maybe I put the wrong. Yeah, that's what I presume. Okay, and now I can use independence. This guy is independent of this guy, so I can put the expectation. And the expectation of this guy is going to be S transpose S. What? Ah, yes. Thank you. Okay, and so what I see is that what I have proven is that this is going to be approximately the expectation of z minus wi minus 1 S transpose S 1 minus 1 over p trace of S transpose S z minus w. Okay, and now I am nearly done. Again, I can argue, and this is done in the note, that you can forget about this because it's only a one-dimensional perturbation. And so, yeah, I have Wn. And so I do the same trick to express this in terms of the resolvent. So what I get is minus identity plus z times the expectation of the resolvent. Okay. And so now what I have an equation on my resolvent, which is just linear. Which is that the expectation of z minus wn minus 1 times, so what is it? It would be z minus, so it's all the same here, st s divided by 1 minus 1 over p, the trace of st s. So this is, let's say, Rn of z, and here I have Rn of z. So this is going to, this is the resolvent. So I just plug this, this term on this side, and so this should be the identity, approximately. Okay, so then I just have to invert, and I find that I have a kind of self-consistent equation. For my resolvent. Okay. So now, of course, you have this guy, which depends on Ln, but you can, now it's in the sense of operator, so you can multiply by this guy. You find an equation for this guy, and you express it in terms of just the resolvent. And at the end, you should find exactly this. Okay, so this is phi. This is what I denoted phi over there. Yeah, actually, should have. And what you find is that somehow 1 over 1 minus 1 over p, the trace of STS n of z, when you solve this equation, is going to be this z, this alpha minus 1 plus z, g of z. Okay, I mean, it's just, you just solve your equations. So that's very easy, and you find at the end of the day what you have proven is that you have a formula for the resolvent in expectation, and that your Stieltjes transform will satisfy this equation. Okay, I'm trying to go to the next topic. Do you have any question about that? I mean, there are more details in the notes, but somehow what I think is nice in this proof is that, again, you only rely on independence. And expanding on these independent vectors, you find equations. So that's a bit like what we did for Wigner matrices. And you show that you have a unique solution, and then you prove you get the convergence. Okay? Okay, so I shift topic. And if you want more details, we can discuss that. And you can look at the notes. Okay, so the next topic was about extreme eigenvalues. Okay, so the idea is that somehow if you have only random noise, the extreme eigenvalue, so the eigenvalues, so if only noise, and you look at the extreme eigenvalue, so you know the extreme eigenvalue should be outside of the bulk. Okay, so the largest eigenvalue should be on the right side of the limiting of the support of the limiting spectral measure, but still they could be far away. Okay, so for instance, when you have Wigner matrices, so you are asking if you look at the largest eigenvalue, they could be very far or they could just be here. And so the idea is that if you have completely random matrices, the eigenvalue should stick to the bulk. So eigenvalue stick to the bulk. In the sense that the largest eigenvalue goes to right hand side of the support of limiting spectral measure. Okay, and this was proven in many cases. So this was proven by Komlosch and Foddy, I think, for Wigner matrices in the 70s. So for Wigner matrices. But it also for more complicated Wishart matrices. So if, for instance, you look at this model that we were considering, so this was Bay and Silverstein. So they prove that you have this phenomenon that eigenvalues stick to the bulk, and the main assumption is that you should have a moment of order 4, so both in Wigner matrices and in this case for the entries. Okay, so before, for convergence of the spectral measure, we need only finite second moment somehow, but for convergence of the extreme eigenvalue, you need moment of order 4, and actually if you don't have such a moment, then the eigenvalues are going to go away from the bulk. We'll have this phase that will diverge to infinity.
You should also assume that the eigenvalues of f equal to the subset. There is phi f.
Well, that was what I was wondering yesterday, but in fact, no, I looked at the, I looked at, yeah.
Even if S has an eigenvalue, which is just take two eigenvalues for the spectrum of S star,
Yeah.
what will happen in this regime is that around each eigenvalue will have a different curve. You will have a little Bouchard thing around each of them. So then it might be that the support is not connected.
Yeah.
And we have, but then you will stick to the edge of the very
Yeah.
fine part.
What Bay and Silverstein proved is even more than the largest eigenvalue is that all the eigenvalues stick to the bulk. So in this case, you can have several, and still you will have no eigenvalues asymptotically. Okay, so then the question is, so what happens if now you have some signal, and in particular if you add some perturbation, so let's say to a Wigner matrix, where this is a unit vector. Okay, so if you do that, and you could ask the same, so if you do Wishart matrices, I think the right way to. Maybe you could put it in the middle. Well, actually, I started like this. Okay, so if you do a one-dimensional perturbation, I think it's okay. So if you do a one-dimensional perturbation of your random matrices, what will happen with the eigenvalues? Okay, and of course it will not change the spectral measure, because we saw that if we do a one-dimensional perturbation, the eigenvalues will be interlaced by these Weyl inequalities. And so at most you can have eigenvalues going away at the end or at each end, but this is the only thing which can happen, and you are wondering if the largest eigenvalue is going to stick to the bulk or not. So this is what was called the BBP transition. So for Bike, Benarus, and Péché, it's an article of 2005, where they consider this case, where the Yn is Gaussian, and they study the largest eigenvalue, and the where did I put my I didn't add. Yeah, I need to take my notes to remember the exact formulas. But so what? Yeah. So what they showed is that so the largest eigenvalue of so this matrix. I forgot to divide by 1 over n. So this is going to go to okay. So here, okay, what lambda n was m times n. So maybe I divide by m, and again m over n is going to alpha, and so this is going to converge to the largest eigenvalue if theta is smaller than the square root of alpha. So nothing will happen on the largest eigenvalue if theta is small enough, and you will have you will have an outlier otherwise. Okay. So actually they prove much more refined result in this paper, but this is what the result which has drawn a lot of attention, because what this shows is that somehow if you have a signal, a one-dimensional signal, some structure at the beginning, you can retrieve it provided your theta is small enough, it's large enough. And in fact there were lots of work to show, to test, for instance, if you, okay, I'm going to try to do a machine learning kind of 2 second talk. So if you if you want to test the hypothesis that there is a signal or there is no signal, well, if theta is greater than the square root of alpha, you can look at the largest eigenvalue and say that and decide whether you had the signal. So if it sticks to the bulk, of course, you had no signal, and if it doesn't, oh, okay. If it doesn't stick to the bulk, you will conclude that there was this signal at the beginning. Yeah.
The condition on the X is what for this result, that everything is about.
I think it's actually I got the, so I think it's just something like this. The yn as a force, so maybe plus epsilon, I think. I think in Bayin-Silverstein it's a pretty, I mean, I was surprised myself how general this is. But, you mean that yes, there should be, yes, it's true that, it's true that there should be no, yeah, you are right that there is a contradiction. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, you are right. So S has no outlier. But it's, yeah, okay. Yeah, I will double check I have the article. But you are right that otherwise there is a contradiction. Yeah. No, I mean, you are completely right. So
I suppose that you use the empirical measure of the spectrum of S star S to converge, and then if you have an outlier, it doesn't count. But the limiting object does not depend on that.
no, but the
diagonal will be everybody 1.
yeah, but
the
you.
limiting of the bulk will not do it. It will be direct mass at 1.
No, but so what I mean is that they have an article which is no eigenvalues outside of the bulk, and in this article actually but I quickly checked yesterday, and it's true that I was tired, but I didn't see I was looking for such a condition and I didn't see, but it has to be, because otherwise you just take S to be this, and you have a contradiction.
No, but again, it's not. It's the empirical measure of S star S which should converge. And in this case, it does. Because it's just all 1.
Yes.
And then just one thing that will.
Yes, but then this would say that you have no outliers, and your result says there is an outlier, so you have a contradiction. Yeah. No, you are completely right. Yeah, no, you are completely right. So I think that somewhere they must have a condition here, and I quickly checked yesterday, but I mean, I am not very familiar with all this literature. As I say, I don't like so much Wishart matrices. So, but you see, you have phenomenal stuff like this, which. But yes, so I think there should be no outliers. Yeah. Okay. So then you have this result, and so okay. So I was just saying that this was built to construct algorithm to detect whether you have a one-dimensional signal in your data or not, and it was shown that if theta is big enough, well, you can use the spectrum to detect it, and it was shown that if this theta is smaller than this, so you don't see a change in the largest eigenvalue, and actually you cannot construct algorithm to detect the signal. It's just too weak. So this was actually work by Florent and some other co-authors. It's in the notes, and also Zaitouni and Montanari on range panels. Okay, so this BBP transition was used to detect the possibility of a one-dimensional signal. Okay, so that's great. So I did it very quickly. So so now I want to give you some ideas of proof, unless you have more questions about this. So basically, so the argument for this kind of the fact that eigenvalues stick to the bulk are quite tough. I mean, that's so they're quite tough. Now there are some well-known technology to approach it, but it's always quite technical. So for instance, so if you look at Komlosj-Furdi, so their argument was to bound moments, so as what we did yesterday. And to show that somehow it grows like what we expected. But you need, so this is what we did for K. This is what we did, so we proved that this was like the Catalan numbers. But we need to prove it for K, which is going to infinity faster than the log. Okay. So it's not enough. So if you do this kind of estimate only for K finite, you will get the convergence of the empirical measure. To get an estimate on the largest eigenvalue, you need to have moments which are going to infinity with n. And why is that? Because you want to say that so the probability that lambda max is greater than, let's say, 2 plus epsilon. Well, you are just going to apply Chebyshev. Times the expectation of lambda max to the 2k. And then you are going to bound this by the trace. Because this is what you know how to compute. But of course, so here you lost, you had only one eigenvalue and you put n. So what you need to do is to bound this by n times ck divided by 2 plus epsilon to the 2k. 1 plus small o of 1. So of course, if you have your bound only for k finite, then you cannot say anything because you have this n. But ck is going like 2 to the 2k when k goes to infinity. So you see that if you can take k going to infinity faster than any logarithm, this will go to 0. Okay, so that's the first approach. And this was, so in the notes, I give the argument that Sinai and Soshnikov gave to get this kind of estimate. To have k which is smaller than small o of square root of n. But of course this is sufficient. Okay, but it's always much more complicated to do that because last time when we did that for k finite, we see that there is some combinatorics, but the combinatorics becomes much more complicated when you try to take k going to infinity. Okay, so that's the first. That's the first argument. So you can also use a Stieltjes transform. but again, you need to refine. Still just. You need to refine what we did quite a lot. And I think, for instance, you need to show that. So if you look at the Stiegler's transform of your matrix. Okay, so you look at the Stiegler's transform, you need to be able to evaluate it when the imaginary part of this time goes to 0. And you need to show that it's going to be close to its limit at a good speed. So namely what you need to show is that for y, so in general you took greater than n minus c, this is going to go to 0. If x is not in the support of the limiting measure. So in the notes I explain why you need this kind of, this is enough to get the convergence of the support, but again, getting this kind of estimate is much more intricate than what we did before. The fact that y was of order 1 helped us to get rid of many things, so you can do that, and you need to be much more careful at each step. So I won't do that. And I want to discuss how to prove the BBP transition, because this is kind of easier. So the BBP transition. And again, because I prefer to do it, I will do it for Wigner matrices. And yes, also I want to show a result that I didn't cite, but which is important, I think, in application to signal detection, which is that if you look at the V, the largest, the eigenvector for the largest eigenvalue, so it's x and theta, for largest eigenvalue of x and theta. Then somehow the idea is that when theta is large, this eigenvector should align with E. That's what you would get. You would guess from the fact that this guy is bounded. And actually, you have a more precise estimate. So if you look at the scalar product of V and E square, so this will go, so in this case, towards so the Stiegler's transform of yeah. So if theta is greater than 1, so this will go to the Stiegler's transform of, so this will go to this guy. So you have a formula for the scalar product of almost surely. And so this was due to Rao and Benaich, George. Okay, so why is it interesting? Because, so again, so the idea is that if theta is greater than 1, your largest eigenvalue will go away from the bulk at theta plus 1 over theta. And then you can try to find out what was the signal, or at least weakly recover it, by looking at the eigenvector for this largest eigenvalue. And the scalar product with the signal will converge to something which is non-trivial, which is positive at each for each theta, which is greater than 1. Yeah. And G is of V is the Stiegler's transform of the semicircle law. Yes.
Is there a way to
I'm going to show to prove it. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I have like 25 minutes. Okay, so just to give you to show you how this kind of results appear. Again, it's like what I have been using so far. It's a mixture of concentration of measure type of and linear algebra. So for the BBP transition, so you want to prove that the largest eigenvalue of X and E transpose. So what I want to prove, I want to prove this result, almost surely. I will not prove that it converges to the boundary when theta is smaller than 1, but I will prove this result, which is kind of more fun. So how do you see that? So you look at the largest, so you call it lambda max, and you just write the equation that the determinant of lambda max minus your matrix. So this should be 0 by definition. Okay. Now what you say that I look for an eigenvalue which is outside of the bulk of this guy, because I know that this guy, its eigenvalue are going to stick to the bulk. So I can factorize by this matrix. And so what I find is that this is 1 plus theta lambda max minus X minus 1 E transpose. Okay, so I just factorize. And I use the fact that almost surely, if I look for lambda max which is greater than 2, this is going to be non-zero. Okay, so this means that this determinant has to be 0. Ah, yes. Thank you. So this determinant has to be 0, but this is just a rank 1 matrix. Okay, and so or I can put the scalar product with E on the other side in the determinant. So this is equivalent to say that 1 is equal to theta E lambda max minus X divided by square root of n minus 1 E. Okay, so that's pretty good. So now the point that you would like to make. So E here is deterministic, but imagine that Xn was Gaussian. You could take E uniformly distributed on the sphere by invariance of X, and then you could imagine that this is like Gaussian, and that you have like this Hanson-Wright inequality that you can take the expectation over E. Okay, and so that's what is called the isotropic law. So again, it would be easy to prove here in the case of Gaussian, otherwise it's a bit more work. So I think it's proved like in Knowles yin, when you have when the entries have some stretch decay, exponential decay, that this is going to be close to the trace. again, if this was Gaussian, it's kind of not very difficult to see. In general, you have a bit more work to do. Okay, so here you are done, because so this is going to be approximately the Stiglitz transform at lambda max. And what you see that your lambda max must satisfy that the image by the Laplace transform, by the Stiglitz transform, is 1 over theta. Okay, and now you have an explicit formula for G, and you can solve it and find that this means that lambda max is 1 over theta plus theta. Okay. So that's for the BBP transition, or at least how you can identify the eigenvalue which can go out of the bulk. Okay. Here the argument is, you know that if an eigenvalue is going out of the bulk of Xn, then it has to be this. Okay. And you can refine this result to prove that, so this is a case only when theta is greater or equal to 1, and when theta is smaller than 1, then this goes to the boundary. Okay, so the last thing I want to do today is to prove this kind of result. So it's again the same kind of ID. Yes.
So the BBP transition says that if theta is greater than 1, then here.
Okay. With the mask, it's super hard, yeah.
Then the largest eigenvalue is like the factor, right?
Yes.
But if it's smaller, if theta is smaller than 1, it doesn't say that you cannot recover the signal.
So what I said, what I did doesn't prove it, but so my understanding is that in some work of Florent and co-authors, they showed that in the case where theta is smaller than 1, you can't, there is no algorithm which can detect it.
So it's like information theoretically, or
Yeah.
But if we don't know anything about this computer structure.
Okay. Yeah, so yes.
Are there the tasks where you take the matrix X that is not, that is not independent sentence, but it comes from a matrix model?
Matrix model?
It comes from a matrix model.
So if it comes from a matrix model, you will have invariance under the unitary.
Yeah.
Then it's okay. I mean, I did some work with Florent Benaïch on Miden Maida a long time ago, and what we proved is that if E is uniformly distributed on the sphere, then we can do all this computation, because somehow everything works. Here I have E which is uniformly distributed. Here I have concentration of measure, because E is uniformly distributed. And so as soon as I know that the Stiglitz transform is going to converge, I can do exactly the same reasoning. That's what we did, yes.
And that is doing something which, for example, the matrix model is not square root. So if I take a matrix model density is an S that is not square root, but it's like soft. Soft, I think that you have higher resolution. Does theta, the transition point, shift to smaller theta, or does it? I imagine that the transition point theta, whether you just detect the outlier, depends a bit on what happens to the X.
So the point is that what you will get, is always this kind of formula, but where G is a Stiglitz formula transform for your model. And here the question is, when can you invert it outside of -2, 2? And this is what is going to give you the threshold. So it's the first point where you can invert it. Yeah. So it's Yeah, this is when this is out of the image of the bulk somehow.
Does this kind of method work as well when theta is sort of in the critical regime? Like, you know, because one
No, no. Here I think here I
In fact, that's the whole
Yeah.
point of the initial
Yeah, yeah.
DBT.
yeah. That's why I said that this paper is much more complicated actually.
So this was before your paper.
No. In this paper, what we did is we got the entire system can
Okay,
conclude.
definitely.
And in this case, we addressed the critical regime for the fluctuation. You see, when you're below the threshold, it's twisting again.
Yes.
And it's above the threshold, in this case, it's fluctuated by calcium. And in the critical regime, it goes to the edge, but the fluctuations are new, different.
Yes, yes,
So, but you can prove that it goes to the edge at the same speed than in the subcritical regime. It's just that it fluctuates a bit differently.
Yeah, I mean but
Prove this in a non-explicit case would be super hard.
maybe there could be some kind of universality. I don't know.
I hope there is. For this is
Yeah.
what we call modified crystallism, whatever. It
Yes,
could be
yes, I would
universal.
imagine it, but it's not proven.
I don't know. I don't want to try.
No, but that's very interesting.
But it's a good question.
Yeah. But at least you see that here there are lots of things which would
Yes,
will
yes,
not
that's
work.
why
So
I asked,
yeah.
in this, you need optimal scale isotropic flow.
Yeah, and
We need to be corrected.
yeah. And by the way, I don't know if now they have a more general isotropic law. Maybe there is in the work of Erdos and so on. But okay, at least under this kind of hypothesis. Okay, so let me just to finish prove how you get this kind of second result. So it's really in the same spirit. So you write that xn. So your perturb matrix. So applied to V is going to be this lambda max V. And so this shows that xn square root of n minus so lambda max times identity of V. So maybe I should put it like this. Is going to be theta E, and here you have the scalar product of E and V. Okay, so it's just linear algebra. And then, so what this implies is that this is theta E V, and then you have lambda max minus this guy applied to E. Okay? So I just solved the equation which defines the largest eigenvalue. And then I notice that I'm only interested in unit vector, so I can just divide by the L2 norm. So I think that you're seeing now where I'm going. Okay, now I take V E square. So what I get is E lambda max minus xn square root of n minus 1e square. And what I have below is E, and I have the square of this. Okay? And now again, if I can apply my isotropic law, this is going to go to the Stieltjes transform, and this is going to go to the 1/n the trace of this square, which I can relate to the derivative of the Stieltjes transform. Okay. So dE square is going to converge. So if isotropic law so this is going to converge to G lambda max square divided by the integral of 1 over lambda max minus x squared d sigma, and which is G of lambda max square, and you can see that this is the derivative. And this is almost sure as soon as you have all the isotropic law and so on, which happens almost surely. So I was scared that I would be taken by time, and so I speeded up.
Can I take some of your points?
Yes.
So in fact, in DBT, you could imagine, and Tracy would have done, you could have a rank 2, rank 17 perturbation.
So this
Yeah.
works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that, of course, for the
Yeah.
if you have two, let's say you have two thresholds,
Mm-hmm.
or with two eigenvalues to get out, and one could stay the bulk and the other one. But then for the, I don't know about the eigenvector. Would the two thresholds be the same for the two eigenvectors?
You mean the
So if you have, let's say, if you have a rank 2 perturbation,
mm-hmm.
then you have a first threshold at which the top eigenvector will, eigenvalue would get out the bulk.
Yeah.
And then you could imagine that the top eigenvector will correlate with this
Mm-hmm.
E1.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have a second threshold where the second eigenvalue will get out of the bulk,
Mm-hmm.
and where the and so would also the second eigenvector correlate with the.
So yeah, so I mean, so what you mean is, so you take theta 1, E1 plus theta 2, E2 transpose. So then, yes, you can see that each of the outliers will create an eigenvalue, which is theta 1 plus 1 over theta 1 and theta 2 plus 1 over theta 2. And you can see that the eigenvectors will satisfy also the same thing. You have even, you can even do that when you have a number of outliers which goes to infinity with n. You can also study the fluctuations of this largest eigenvalue and show its Gaussian. Its Gaussian depends on the nature. So there was this nice paper by Mireille Capitaine, Donati Martin, and Ferral, where they show that the fluctuations are not universal. They are not yeah.
If theta 1 equals theta 2, it's not that.
Yeah. Well, it's GOE. Yeah. Yeah. GOE of dimension 2. Yeah.
But if theta 1 is equal to theta 2, you cannot correlate them. You should have a space of correlate.
No, but for the eigenvalue, it's true that it fluctuates non-boundary.
Yeah. Yeah.
It fluctuates like the top eigenvalue
Yeah.
of the 2 by 2.
It's the GOE, but even what I think they proved in that paper is that if you, what was it? That if you have a law which is not Gaussian for this, it's law mu, then you can have fluctuations which are different.
No, because in the Gaussian
Yeah.
case for the Wishart, this is what
Yeah.
the DBT paper
Yeah.
says. Then you're right. So you're saying this is not.
Yeah, this is not universal when it's not Gaussian for the fluctuations, but you still will observe the same convergence. Yes, but yes, you had a tremendous amount of work on, around this BBP transition to generalize. So what I said to more random matrices and to final result. So as Gérard said, when you have the same theta, then you will have two eigenvalues at the same place, two outliers at the same place, and then the fluctuation of this eigenvalue will look like a GOE.
But as soon as you're in a good regime, all the eigenvectors correlate.
What do you mean? Because you have each, so it would depend what is the direction of this. So you would like to take E1 and E2, which are not orthogonal. So then you have to then you have to if they are not orthogonal, you have to put it in the basis to orthogonalize them, and then you have to compute the outliers. Because of course, if they would be the same, then you would get 2 theta 1. So it would be, the outlier would be 2 theta 1 plus 1 over 2 theta 1. So you need to, somehow, you can replace this by a matrix, and you need to diagonalize it, to look at it. So you imagine it's a Gaussian, and you can always come back to the fact that you have orthogonal perturbations, and here you have the eigenvalues of your matrix, of your perturbation. So okay, so next time I will spend some time to explain some large deviations, and hopefully it will have a correlation with Gérard Gérard's course. So this large deviation were eventually used in this study of complexity of random functions.
Great.
Thank you very much.